Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Today I'm going to talk about the Republican Party. And I'm just going to show several examples proving that the Republican Party does not respect African American people. We all know their policy positions. We know that they oppose many of the things that benefit African Americans. They oppose affirmative action. It was Republican attorneys generals who helped lead the way to striking down Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. We know that the Republicans are the ones cutting Head Start. They are the ones that want to cut Pell Grants. They are the ones that want to cut other programs that benefit minority and African American communities. They want to cut welfare. They want to cut food assistance. So many of their positions are contrary to the interests of African Americans. But the point of this video is not to go into their policy positions. It is to show clear examples of how they have an undercurrent of hate within their party. You know, they have an undercurrent of anti-African American animus within their party. They have a complete lack of sympathy and empathy towards African Americans. They are completely insensitive to the needs of African Americans. And I'm just going to provide a few examples, and then at the end of this video I'm going to pose a question. So the first example that I want to show you is the whole Southern strategy, just to lay the framework so you'll understand what we're talking about here. So I'm going to show, actually I'm going to air some of Lee Atwater's comments. For those of you who don't know, Lee Atwater was a major Republican strategist, political strategist. He helped elect the first George Bush, and he was, very instrumental in the party at that time. And in this clip, he talks about the Southern strategy. So I'm going to play this clip so you can get a full understanding of part of what the Southern strategy is about. And before I do so, I'm just going to give you some background. Shortly after the passage of major civil rights legislation in this country, many racist Southern Democrats were outraged. And, the Republican Party tapped into that outrage to turn it into political power. So they would pander to this racist element. And in this clip, Lee Atwater explains how they would do so. So check out this clip, and then, I'll continue the commentary on the other side.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, nigger. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
All right, so you heard the clip of Lee Atwater explaining how the Republicans use coded language. They talk about African Americans without talking about African Americans directly. They use code words. They no longer use the N word. They Instead of the N word, they use the word inner city. They use words like urban. They use words like poor people. They use words like thugs. They use words like welfare queens, and welfare and food stamps. They use terminology like that is designed to express the same kind of animus towards African Americans without directly saying so. So here I'm going to play some excerpts from Paul Ryan's statements that he did during an interview. He had an interview on Bill Bennett's morning show. Bill Bennett's show is called Morning in America. So I'm going to play a few excerpts from that so that you can listen to it and then, continue the discussion later.
A man working, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And so that's this tailspin or spiral that we're looking at in our communities. Your buddy Charles Murray or Bob Putnam over at Harvard, those guys have written books on this, which is we have got this tailspin of culture in our inner cities in particular, of men not working, and just generations of men not even thinking about working or learning the value and the culture of work. And so there's a real culture problem here that has to be dealt with. Everybody's got to get involved. So this is what we talk about when we talk about civil society. If you're driving from the suburb, to the sports arena downtown by these blighted neighborhoods, you can't just say, I'm paying my taxes, government's going to fix that. You need to get involved. You need to get involved yourself, whether through a good mentor program or some religious charity, whatever it is, to make a difference. And that's how we help resuscitate our culture.
Yeah.
All right, so you heard Paul Ryan's statement. See, basically, what you have here is a man who's expressing his contempt towards black people without using the word black. He's basically saying that the reason why we are in our predicament is because of our poor culture and our poor values. And, such an ideology basically exonerates society. It says that society has no responsibility to the poor, has no responsibility to African Americans. And, basically this serves as the groundwork or the foundation for a lot of their policies. As I said at the beginning, they want to get rid of social programs so that their whole objective is to prove that these programs are not needed. Programs that help African Americans, programs that benefit African Americans. And as Lee Atwater said, the Republicans will use language about taxing, spending, and all that kind of stuff to basically justify dismantling programs that benefit black people, programs like the Pell Grant, which makes it possible for students, poor African American and other students, to attend college. It makes it possible for people to realize the American dream. So they want to close these doors. They want to close or cut back on Head Start, a program designed to help prepare kids for school. And many minority and African American children benefit from such programs. But by shifting the language or the discussion to poor values and so-called black pathology, these Republicans are able to forego, the civic duty and civic responsibility that society has to the less fortunate. And they're able to blame the victim for his condition. And such a discussion allows these people to avoid dealing with structural racism in this country. It allows these people to avoid waging a war against poverty that disproportionately impacts black people. It allows the system to continue. So, again, this is just another example of GOP racism, basically they're saying that you people are don't have the right values. You people, African Americans are lazy. That's what they're saying. That we're lazy. That we don't have what it takes to handle our business. That we're not men. That we're just leeches on society. That's basically what this guy is saying. That we're parasites or something. And this is just racism. It's just naked racism, covered up in cold language. And this kind of talk is designed to basically blow a dog whistle to the racist element within the Republican Party, to fire them up and, motivate them. And then I'm going to move on to this other example. You have this Republican. He's actually running for Arizona's 2nd congressional district, and he compared entitlements to slavery, and then he actually went on to make even worse and more objectionable statements. But I want to go back to Paul Ryan first. Paul Ryan, after those statements were issued, after his interview took place, there was a lot of press about it. And so he tried to backtrack his comments and say, well, I wasn't talking about race. I was talking about culture. But again, as I said before, these people rarely admit that they are racist. They rarely admit their racial animus. But we all know exactly what he was talking about. And there's no way around it. And I'm not buying the story. And you shouldn't either. All right, so I'm going to go on to this other story. So you have this Republican who's running in Arizona's 2nd congressional district. His name is Jim Brown. And here's what he said about slavery. These people are so disrespectful and so insensitive. And many of these people are Republicans. And, on my blog and elsewhere, I documented how many Republicans have no regard for our history. They don't care about our suffering during slavery. And this is another example of such insensitivity. Here's what Jim Brown said about slavery. He said, back in the day of slavery, slaves were kept in slavery by denying them education and opportunity while providing them with their basic needs, not by beating them and starving them, although there were isolated cases of course. Then he goes on to say, basically slave masters or slave owners took pretty good care of their slaves and livestock, and this kept their business rolling along. He actually says that slave owners took pretty good care of their slaves. Pretty good care of their slaves. I mean, this comment is so absurd and so ridiculous. I mean, if you've seen the photographs of the slaves' back ripped apart by the whip, if you've seen the shackles that the slaves were held in, if you've read any of the slave narratives about the brutality of this white man, this slave master, you would know that this man is writing, this saying this is living on Fantasy Island. You would know that he's completely delusional and out of his mind to suggest that slaves were taken care of, that the slave master took pretty good care of slaves. But again, this is the kind of insensitivity you have in the Republican Party. You would never hear a Republican saying that the Holocaust wasn't that bad. You would never hear that. But when it comes to the African American, they have complete disregard for our sensitivities. They don't care nothing about black people. And I don't know how many examples black people need in order to realize this. I mean, most of us get it. Most of us know that the Republicans aren't worth a damn when it comes to black people. But I'll get to that at the end of this video. Now, the last example that I want to point out of these stinking Republicans and their disregard for black people is this statement by Rush Limbaugh. A couple of days ago, on his show, he basically admitted that Republicans don't work with Obama simply because he's black. And, so I'm going to read from his statement. I tried to get the video, but I had a hard time getting it. Something must be wrong with Media Matters website. But in this article on Politicus USA, Real Liberal Politics, they talk about Rush Limbaugh's statement, and they actually had a video link to Media Matters, but for some reason I can't access it. But on his program, Rush Limbaugh said this. He said, "I also think, folks, that there will be dramatic changes once let me put it this way. The fact that we are living in the historic era with the first African-American president has everybody paralyzed and everybody scared. Political leadership in Washington is literally paralyzed. Political consultant leadership in Washington is literally paralyzed. The Republican Party is literally paralyzed. Many American citizens are literally paralyzed, frightened to death to say anything to anyone about what they really think. And while this is happening, things are going down the tubes at a rapid rate. So once we get past this historical era, I think a lot of this is going to change." And then he goes on to say, "I think the paralysis will end. Even if we get the first female president, it's still not going to be near the paralysis that exists today. That paralysis was planned for and is being used to its maximum benefit by the Democrat and the American left." Okay, so that's his statement. And basically he's admitting that the Republicans don't want to work with Obama because he's black. He talks about this historical era with the first African-American president. And he talks about how that paralyzed the whole political process. And he's basically acknowledging that these Republicans don't want to work with Obama because he's black. And we've been saying this for the longest time. I mean, everyone knows this. This guy, the president has put forth ideas that were initially supported by these no-good Republicans. But because we have a black man in the White House, these clowns don't want to embrace the ideas that they formerly embraced. They don't want to see a successful black man achieve, prominence in the White House. They don't want to see the brother go down in history as one of the greatest presidents ever. So they're doing everything in their power to obstruct everything this brother is trying to do. And then, in the final analysis, they use that obstruction to claim that Obama is not doing anything to improve conditions for not only African Americans, but all Americans. So those are basically prime examples of the Republican Party's animus towards African Americans. And with blatant, obvious examples like this, I just have a simple question for all those black Republicans out there. Why do you support a party that doesn't support you? And I challenge any of you black Republicans, to produce a response video to this answering that question. I challenge you to prove to me that the Republican Party deserves our vote. I want to know, what have they done for African Americans in the last 10 years or the last 20 years? Hell, I'll even go back 30 years. Tell me, what have they done for black people? Tell me why we should support the Republican Party.